Hello and welcome back to my channel. I hope you guys are having a wonderful and safe week. If this is your first time joining us, hi, my name is Rachel Clemens and I enjoy covering all things true crime related. So if you're a weirdo like us, please join, hit that subscribe button and join the conversation. We would love to have you. Now in last week's video, we covered the case of Lavinia Johnson, who was the soldier who her death was ruled actually a suicide. And if you haven't seen it, I would really encourage you to please take a step back, go check that video out. Mainly because there is still a petition going on to reopen Lavinia's case, and I highly encourage you guys to go check that out and give her some support so that we can get this case rolling. Now I'm gonna jump right into it. For this week's case, we're gonna do things a little bit differently. We're gonna go back to the good old days. And I know the first thing that came to mind was the 1800s, of course, so let's go back. This is the legend of America's first female serial killer, Lavinia Fisher. Now, before I really start diving into today's case, I do want to reiterate the fact that this case is from the 1800s, so there is not a ton of information. This is all, you know, legends of the area as to what happened with Lavinia, and I find it extremely fascinating. There's not a ton of pictures either, so I apologize, but it's a good one. Now, Lavinia Fisher was born in 1793. Now, again, there is a lack of documentation on a lot of things, so what we do understand is that she lived most of her life in North Carolina. They said that Lavinia really seemed to just kind of come out of nowhere. Her and her husband, John. So it was John and Lavinia Fisher living near North Carolina. Now, Lavinia and John actually ran an inn that was called the 6 Mile House. And it was called the 6 Mile House because it was about 6 miles outside of Charleston. Back in these times, it was, again, the early 1900s at this point. This was prime real estate for people that were trying to get people to come in, travelers, because people were bushing in, you know, tobacco, cotton, animal hides, produce into Charleston from their farms, and they would travel along this road, and they just so happened to be about 6 miles outside of Charleston. Travelers that were bringing their produce and things in would stop to rest and get some, you know, get their bearings straight before they went in, or they would stop on their way back out. Lavinia was considered super beautiful, very charming, and she would always converse with the travelers, getting to know them a little bit better. And strangely enough, after some time, men began to go missing and just mysteriously disappear. And reports of these missing men got back to authorities. These missing men were reported to be seen last at the 6 Mile House. And so authorities went to go and investigate. During their investigations, authorities were unable to find any definitive evidence that was linking Lavinia and or John to these mysterious disappearances. On top of not finding anything that they thought was connecting to them, Lavinia was extremely popular in the community. Their inn, the 6 Mile House, was very popular in the community. So with those two things, they kind of just let it slide and let it go, and they dropped the investigation. And again, I want to reiterate, Lavinia was considered super beautiful, very charming, and so they were a super popular inn for people to go to. Because she was so involved and invested in her travelers, talking with them, asking questions, and getting to know them on a much closer basis, I guess. And shortly after this, again, reports of more missing men began to come through, and more men just continued to go missing. And the locals at this time, and when I say locals, I'm talking about Charleston. The Charleston locals were getting infuriated at this point because they saw a pattern of men leaving Charleston, stopping at the 6 Mile House, and going missing. They were enraged that authorities were not really taking this seriously. They were unable to find anything. So technically, in like the lines of law, they were unable to do anything about it. And so the locals decided to take matters into their own hands. They were completely convinced that this was all Lavinia's doing, and that she was in fact utilizing her beauty and her charisma to lure these men in and to make them really be vulnerable and tell her things about, finances that they were doing, the trades that they were doing, and what kind of things that she could have benefited from them. They truly believed that she was using her good looks, her popularity to lure the men in so that her husband could rob and kill them. In February 1819, these locals created a group of vigilantes and went to go and confront Lavinia and John Fisher about these occurrences and try and put a stop to it. It's unclear. They did go out to them, they did confront them, but it's unclear what was said. But the group of vigilantes actually left. They left feeling like they were successful in their attempts at putting a stop to this. The group left behind a man by the name of David Ross to kind of keep an eye on things and make sure that Lavinia and John were doing what they said that they were going to do, but they left behind David Ross to keep an eye on things. When they left, early the next morning, poor David Ross was actually jumped by two men and drug over to what would be considered a group of men that seemed to be led by Lavinia. David, on the ground, was looking up at Lavinia, just pleading with his eyes, trying to see if he could get some mercy and make it stop. I mean, that had to have been terrifying. While David was pleading for mercy in his eyes, Lavinia responded by choking him and smashing his head through a window and leaving him. Miraculously, David Ross was able to escape and actually get back to Charleston and report everything to authorities. Now, around this same time, there was a man traveling from Georgia to Charleston. His name was John Peebles. He was tired, he was exhausted. That's a long trip. And thankfully for that man, he came across a place to stay. He found the 6 Mile House. He was greeted by a beautiful Lavinia, who was, of course, charming and very warm. Unfortunately, she did have to tell him, we unfortunately do not have any rooms available right now, but you are more than welcome to come in. I will feed you. I'll give you some tea, and you can at least get a good warm meal in your stomach. And as gracious as she is, he accepted her invitation. Lavinia brings him in and gets him a wonderful meal and is just chatting him up using her usual charisma and her beautiful looks to have a wonderful, engaging conversation with him, getting to know him a little bit better, asking him a ton of questions. John just went right along with it. A beautiful woman asking you questions and being invested in who you are and what you're doing. It was hard to keep your walls up, I guess, at that point. Now, Lavinia gets up to go get him his tea, and during this time, John noticed that Lavinia's husband was giving him very strange looks. He didn't really think much about it at the time, but it was something that he mentally noted. Lavinia comes back with the tea, and she is super excited because she says, you know what? I'm excited to tell you we have a room available now. One of our guests just left, and if you want it, it's yours. So Lavinia comes in with the tea. He gets a room to the place. He's super excited. Weirdly enough for John, though, he doesn't care for tea. As gracious and a wonderful host as Lavinia was for him, he didn't want to be rude, but he also didn't want to leave it untouched. So he ended up actually pouring the tea out when she wasn't looking. After this point, John was shown to his room. And as John got to his room and started getting settled, he really started thinking a little bit more about what transpired once he got to the 6 Mile House. He started thinking about all the questions that Lavinia was asking him and how almost invasive those were and how much of a risk he was putting himself at by answering those questions. And then on top of that, the very rude, weird, strange looks he was getting from her husband. He felt very unsettled. So instead of sleeping in his bed, John tried to kind of stay up and keep an eye on things as best he could, and he actually fell asleep in an armchair instead of his bed. Now, this is where things get a little weird. Sleeping in the armchair, John woke up to a loud bang, and when John looks, the bed that he would have been sleeping in had fallen through the floor into a big gaping hole. And he was just in utter shock immediately. And John ended up jumping out the window and just fleeing for his life. And he got away and, of course, went back and reported this to authorities. So finally, with all of these reports, authorities were finally able to arrest Lavinia Fisher and John Fisher. And they even arrested two other gentlemen that were involved in whatever they had going. After arresting them, authorities searched the grounds and dug up as much as what they could. What they found was crazy. They found hidden passageways. They dug up and found, allegedly, based on what the sheriff said, numerous objects and things that could link them to some of the missing travelers. They found tea that had an herb in it that would actually help induce sleep for long periods of time for their travelers. Allegedly, they even found a mechanism that would drop the floor out from underneath whatever bed or whatever room that it was and drop the bed down and put these people into a passageway that was underneath the house. It is said that they were able to find actually hundreds of different remains that were in the basement. Believe it or not, even with all of this, the Fishers still pled not guilty to the charges that were being given to them. In May, Lavinia and John Fisher were found guilty of robbery, murder, among other things. They were sentenced to hang. Of course, they were also given time to appeal this, and during that time, Lavinia and John both had different experiences, I guess, or different ways of dealing with the situation at hand. John Fisher actually went to a priest, was asking for forgiveness, was still saying that he was innocent. Lavinia, on the other hand, would have nothing to do with the minister. She didn't want any of that. She pretty much was giving the finger to the entire community, said, I don't care, whatever. She only give two, right? I'm not sure, but she was just on her own kind of thing. Now, of course, they did try and appeal, and that did not go through whatsoever. They were not having it. The community was definitely making sure that they were going to be convicted and that they were going to be sentenced. And the sentencing, again, was hanging. So on February 18th, 1920, John and Lavinia Fisher were taken to the gallows that were just behind the Charleston jail to be hanged for their crimes. As I stated, they both dealt with things in a different manner. John had the priest with him, the minister, and was praying and verbally asking for forgiveness from the crowd. He even had the minister, he had him read a letter of, asking for forgiveness and explaining, still protruding and still trying to portray his innocence to the crowd before he was being hanged. Lavinia, woo! Legend has it that she really went off the rails on this one. Legend has it that she absolutely demanded to be in her wedding dress on the gallows. And while she was up there, she showed zero signs of remorse. And in fact, they stated that when she was up there, Lavinia stated, if any of you have a message that you want me to send to hell, tell me now and I'll take it with me. Lavinia jumps off the gallows as they're just trying to put the noose on her neck, and she practically hung herself into the crowd. That is in fact how she was hanged. In stating this, I do have to remind everybody, this is back before things were really recorded. This is all hearsay, very legend style. In my sources that I have down below, you can also see that there are different versions of how this ended, and different versions saying that maybe she wasn't, really guilty of this, and she wasn't the first female serial killer in America. But I found it to be an extremely interesting story, one that was just wild and crazy, one that I definitely wouldn't doubt back in the day, because it's hard to document stuff like that. And she's in a huge... Her and John were in a very good position as far as travelers coming through, coming back from selling all their stuff, so they're going to have a lot of money on them. And who's going to say much? There's no phones, there's no social media, there's barely letters, and if they do, it takes like months to get somewhere. So they were in a huge opportunity spot. So I can kind of see a lot of truth behind this. I will point out, I am kind of skeptical about like wearing the wedding dress, because I just don't see them doing that, I guess. And wouldn't her wedding dress be back at the 6 Mile house, 6 miles away, because it was in Charleston that they were hanged? So I'm not, It's a little fuzzy, but a very interesting story, and I want to hear your guys' thoughts. What do you think? Was Lavinia, was she luring these men in, with her beauty and her charm, getting them to break those walls down and kind of just tell her? She got these men to tell her, all of their dealings and all of their stuff and the things that they had to offer her if she were to, I don't know, rob and kill them. I just find it very interesting. So let me know your thoughts down below. I hope you enjoyed today's story. It's a little different, like I said. Let me know. And if you enjoyed it, please hit subscribe. I am really excited, honestly, that I'm over 80 subscribers. That doesn't seem big to some of you guys, but I think it's amazing because I know I'm not very, in the reality of things, I'm not very consistent with putting videos out like every Monday, and I apologize, but in the reality of things, guys, I want to do YouTube like so bad, like 100% of the time, but I do also have a full-time job that I have to, because I got to pay the bills, right? Got a job, a full-time job. I go to school full-time, and I have 2 kids. So it's crazy. So I'm trying to get my content and my stuff out there as much as I possibly can. Those of you that are understanding, I appreciate you so much. Maybe one day, if we build together as an awesome community, I can get to that point. I can get some more time to focus on the thing that I love to do, which is just share true crime with you guys. So leave me your thoughts down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks.